So questions for the collective audience here. So please, there's advantage, and I'm happy to be presenting to you all. And thank you for your attendance and your attention. We'll see if you fall asleep a little bit though, because the carbon dioxide numbers in this room are at levels that you probably are feeling a little bit wrong, and your head is a little bit fuzzy. And those are because the ventilation in this room isn't necessarily allowing the amount of circulation that's necessary to keep it comfortable in the space. So we are kind of seeing and experiencing some resiliency topics firsthand. So if a time of disturbance, service disruption, or disaster were to hit tomorrow, we should be prepared. Perhaps you have the resources at your home, or the ability to phone a friend, or the ability to seek help. But what about those less fortunate? What about those people without a home that have a safety net? What if the impact of that event or events extended beyond a couple of days to a week or a month, or perhaps by permanent? We've all seen and experienced and been impacted in some form or fashion by human-made and nature-related events locally and nationally, record temperatures, forest fires, and the pandemic. And the frequency and amplitude of these events are increasing. That is why we're here today to share our urgent and important message with you around how to mitigate these risks, prepare and prevent, respond, adapt, and recover from climate disturbances, service disruptions, and the disasters that will impact us all. We firmly believe in the fortitude and determination of the community to mobilize. So I'm going to start from zooming to policy and practitioner applications. So we can kind of get all these different kind of inputs from different things that you serve can address and implement. So, see how long it takes to pull up. Okay. So I'm not connected to this thing. Got it. All right. So worldwide, there's an organization that's tracking disasters. And we're going to start a little bit from doomsday and in terms of cost, because sometimes matter makes people act faster than other things. There's $270 billion worldwide in catastrophic disasters that happened in 2022. Yes. We're about 60 or $60 billion of disasters. So that's just to kind of put in perspective. There's a lot of money to help with correcting these things. And through the preventative measures, it's fractional cost. So it's cost effective to do preventative versus responsive. And that's what we've been doing right now. It's more responsive than preventative to that degree of things, how we're keeping up with things. We are working originally in the US and across the roads, but we just need to work faster. Some of these things relate to rainfall. Some of these things are forest fires. We also have storm events. There's a number of things that are impacting us. And we're going to see if this works or doesn't work here. Perhaps, maybe not.
Okay, if we put this in, we should be able to get your video.
All right.
Is the mic is going in and out really bad?
Okay, we'll try that. So here's Mother Nature talking to us.
Some call me nature. Others call me Mother Nature. I've been here for over 4.5 billion years, 22,500 times longer than you. I don't really need people, but people need me. Yes, your future depends on me. When I thrive, you thrive. When I falter, you falter. Or worse. But I've been here for eons. I have fed species greater than you, and I have starved species greater than you. My oceans, my soil, my flowing streams, my forests, they all can take you or leave you. How you choose to live each day, whether you regard or disregard me, doesn't really matter to me. One way or the other. Your actions will determine your fate, not mine. I am nature. I will go on. I am prepared to evolve. Are you?
How's that? Ooh, oh, awesome. Thanks. Wow. Okay. I'm not Julie Roberts. Tough act to follow, or Mother Nature, but so who I am. I am Joanna Papaevthimiou. I am the Oregon State Resilience Officer, which means I work in the office of Governor Tina Kotek, and I'm her policy advisor on disaster resilience and emergency management. I come to that work with a background in emergency management, 10 years at the city of Portland doing that work. And before that, as a land use planner and community organizing around environmental justice issues. I want to talk to you today a little bit about housing resilience in the face of climate change. Okay, it's advancing on my screen, but not over here. Okay, which is this a clicker? Yes. Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. There. Ooh. Slow down. Oh. There we go. All right. So, that's my neighborhood. So presentation overview. I want to talk about what I am thinking of when I'm talking about climate resilient housing, why I think we need it now, particularly in Oregon, and some programs that exist to support it from a financial standpoint. So that's kind of the big picture. What is a climate-proof home? I think that climate resilient housing is housing that lets residents have a good quality of life during extreme heat, during power outages, during wildfire smoke events, and other climate induced emergencies. When you live in climate resilient housing, you can be comfortable when those events are happening outside, and you can be physically comfortable and also not anxious about the impacts to your household from high utility bills or the effect of poor indoor air quality on your kids, or worrying that the power is going to go out and you're not going to be able to get it back on for a long time. So resilient residences are insulated, they're energy efficient, they have effective HVAC systems, and they might have solar power. I think it goes hopefully without saying they're also located outside of hazard zones. So they're not in a floodplain or at the bottom of a landslide scarp or at the top, really. The most resilient housing is adapted to climate, and it's also adapted to the cultural preferences of residents. So it creates spaces for people to interact. Because even if your home is really a safe haven, people also have to contend with schools and workplaces and transit and other things that are not yet well adapted to the climate that we have. And so when you have a community of neighbors, then you can help each other. People always have needed resilient housing, but I think that challenge is growing in Oregon right now. Most of our current housing stock was designed for a cooler climate than the climate that we now have. And it can get really hot inside existing homes in the summer. How hot? Well, last summer, I partnered with Home Forward, and I have to call out my awesome colleague Shaylin, who's okay, yeah, very modest, but who's here, who's a partner in research, just to try and figure out just how hot is it getting inside inside existing affordable housing buildings in the summer. And that was, we were coming to it from emergency management and responding to the heat dome crisis of previous years, Shaylin also, and also responding to concerns of residents that were telling staff, it's hotter in my apartment than it is outside, which is initially hard to understand. Like, how can it be harder in your apartment than it is even outdoors? So we said, well, we'll try and make good, rational decisions based on evidence. Let's collect some data. So we distributed temperature sensors inside people's apartments in 3 different apartment buildings over the summer. And they're the 3 that are shown here: Hollywood East, Northwest Tower, and Peaceful Villa. So 2 like tall mid-rise apartments and 1 garden style apartments. And then we collected data all summer long so we could get a picture of how hot it was getting inside. What did we find out? It was damn hot. The average days over 80 degrees Fahrenheit, that's the orange on this graph. You can read it. That's a lot of days. That's 80 degrees Fahrenheit is, I'll say, hotter than it is in this room right now, where many of us are feeling already pretty warm. And it was exceeding that temperature. It was exceeding that temperature and more. There were a number of apartments that exceeded 85 degrees Fahrenheit inside in someone's place where they're trying to sleep and cook and do work. And some that even exceeded 90 degrees inside, which is really, that's like a sauna inside an apartment. So that was stunning to us, first of all, just to see how hot it was getting inside and how many days. There were apartments that were more than 40 days all summer that were hot like that. But also we see the heat lingers in the night. So this is how we get to that evidence about, or that information about why it's hotter inside the apartment at times than it is even outside. If you look at the graph of the outside temperature and then the more steady indoor temperature, what you see is that at night when people are trying to sleep, it's cooling off and there's some relief outside, but in their apartments, it might still be 80 or 85 degrees. No, that's really hard on the body, trying to not just put up with hot temperatures during the day, but also having to sleep through that heat. There's a lot of apartments that were experiencing this. So that was again, the pretty strong takeaway for us, that this was really an issue to be concerned about. And then finally, because this research project not only tracked temperatures inside the apartments, but it also was a partnership with residents. So we shared temperature data with them. And there was I'm not going to talk about the whole study, but I'll provide a link to it at the end. I think it's an interesting one. It was really a partnership with residents. So we also asked them about their strategies for coping with heat and how it was impacting them. And the majority of residents were strongly impacted by the heat, and people had trouble sleeping. People felt dizzy and nauseous, and also it contributed to a lot of mental health experiences of residents, because when you feel hot and anxious and you can't sleep, that makes impacts your overall well-being a great deal. So that's what we saw in these particular apartments, and it was really an important takeaway for us. Also, because we, as I said at the beginning, Shaylin and I and others came into this work coming out of the heat dome that I'm sure many of us here remember and lived through in 2021. We saw more than 90 heat deaths in Oregon due to the extreme heat that summer. That was such an outlier event for us. And so we were interested to see, to put that in the context of like a more ordinary summer that was the following summer. But what we saw was that, what we saw was that, apartments are getting hot, really, not just in the heat dome, but apartments are getting hot in the summer, all summer long. And after that, I started paying close attention to heat deaths, and I imagine many of us did. And what we saw is that first of all, during the heat dome, we talked about those 90 deaths, but if we look at excess deaths, so people that are passing away, not that the heat is the sole attributable cause, but where it's a contributing factor along with other health conditions or other underlying conditions, it's probably tripling the number of people that are dying of heat in the summer. And that's another reference I'll provide at the end. So we could see that maybe not 90 people, but like 250 people died of the heat that summer, and that if we extrapolate from that to other incidents, what we can imagine is that last summer, 14 people died of the heat, and already this summer, although the medical examiner reports take a long time to come out, we know there were 6 deaths at least in Oregon of heat this summer, and that doesn't include the excess deaths, just the ones that were attributed directly to heat. So that's a huge amount of people that are just having the worst impact from heat. And we can also imagine that for each person that actually has a heat fatality, there are a lot of other people that their health is impacted, that their physical and mental health is impacted, that being close to death of heat is not a good experience either. So there's a lot, we can extrapolate that this is actually a great problem in Oregon now, again, because our housing is not adapted to the climate that we have. And the majority of people that die of heat, this I'm sure will be no surprise to anyone in this audience, they tend to be people who actually are housed, people who are older, people who have underlying health conditions or disabilities, and people who live alone. And people who live alone. So that, I guess, to my thinking, if we look at the impacts of this heat, and as I reflected on it, it just feels like if hundreds of people were dying in Oregon because of landslides or floods or shark attacks or tornadoes, we would be really having this huge conversation about the epidemic of sharks or landslides or something, like what the what. But because these are people that are dying at home alone, it seems like we as a broader community, we haven't really mustered the outrage for these deaths, even though they're really awful and preventable and necessary. So I personally am mustering the outrage about this, and also asking like what can be done about it. So in the short term, because there's a huge amount of housing, you all know that, and retrofitting housing is time consuming, it's costly, it's competing with producing new units, which we also need to be doing because there's a lot of people living outside or in other housing situations that aren't good. What we also saw in this research was that a window air conditioning unit or portable heat pump can work, but also that one window unit in even kind of a medium-sized apartment, it doesn't really meet the need, particularly if they have old windows that are leaking heat inside, and the walls and the corridors are radiating back heat. Adjacent apartments are hot and not air conditioned. We tracked the temperature of air conditioned units that had like a window unit and the temperature differences were not nearly as great as we thought. A lot of places with a window AC unit were getting hot. Also, sometimes people don't turn them on because they have to pay the electrical bill. So there's that. But we also saw that residents were doing a lot or clever. They had a lot of self-help strategies. They had window films, they had curtains, they had fans, they had spray bottles. They had like strategies of like opening and shutting windows, of going outside during a certain time and coming back in. And so there was a lot of ways that residents were helping themselves, and that just a little bit of assistance from a property manager to get window films or to have a cooling location in the lobby where they could stay for a time during the day. That those were really, people were leveraging a little bit of assistance to help themselves stay safe into the heat. The other thing we saw was that welfare checks, which is when the staff that you trust or neighbor that you know checks on one another, that was one of the very best ways to keep people safe in the heat, and particularly for people who have reasons that they might be reluctant to leave their apartment. So they have a dog that they can't bring to the cooling center, they have anxiety, or they have a mobility impairment. It's hard to get down to the first floor. Those are the folks that really need the welfare checks. And so it comes back to that sense of community in the building is also an important strategy for climate resilience. So all these ideas that we see on the slide, the things, also shady landscape areas. People have kids or pets. They need to get outside and have a safe place outside. How do we pay for those things? Okay. I'll be candid, this is the area where I'm less expert because I'm on the emergency management disaster resilience side, but I talked to the housing finance and lobbyists in our office, and I want to draw attention to a couple of programs that I'm hopefully are going to make a difference. And the first is the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program, which passed last August, so 2022, as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And it goes to direct loans and grants to fund projects that can do energy and water efficiency, indoor air quality, zero emission electric generation, so solar, low emission building materials. It touches on a lot of, I'm interested in heat, as you got from my presentation, but touches on a lot of elements that build resilient, sustainable housing. And the loans are available for HUD assistant multifamily properties. There's also some other money in there for benchmarking. If you have an existing property and you just want to understand your water and energy consumption, that it can support that. And at the end, I got a link to how to get more information and applications for this, for the Green Resilient Retrofit Program. Another one is Solar for All that just came out earlier this summer. And this is a big amount of money, $7 billion that will go out to big grants and then, sub-recipients. So money from this program will come to Oregon to expand the amount of solar on low-income properties. And so this is another one that can get to that. That can get to the resilient power in buildings and bringing the energy costs down so people can afford to use air conditioning. So that's another one that I think is worth mentioning. And this is actually the one I love. It's like this good old one from the 70s, the Weatherization Assistance Program. This really gets at the weatherproofing your home, like the weather stripping, and it takes a whole home approach to increasing energy efficiency in the house. And it's funny because it's a program that was really designed to save money on home heating costs in winter for individual family homeowners. And the program as it's designed, it does, I would say in Harvard agrees, tends to underserve multifamily dwellings, and people in small unit multifamily are actually the most energy burdened of all. But there's some sort of ways to work the program that can make it work for a small multifamily. And I think it's really a great program because we can kind of turn it around so it can work for renters, and it can work for people who are looking to save money in the summer and not the winter. And it's like low cost for homeowners, and they see the benefits. It feels very tangible. So I think that's a great program. There's links for that at the end. And then finally, here in Oregon, the climate package that passed just in the last legislative session, House Bill 3409, which was a big climate package, but it included this kind of packaging of a bunch of different incentives that have been available to create healthy heating and cooling for all. And so the state of Oregon is doing a big push to put 500,000 heat pumps into housing in the next decade, and really to prioritize low-income communities and EJ communities where that can have air quality benefits, cooling. It also brings down the cost for heating. There's there's a whole bunch of benefits for people getting one of these heat pumps. And also because installing 500,000 AC units is a lot of work. Shaylin can tell us installing even one can be a lot of work. That hurts. I'm feeling that too. So it also has a workforce training program that will help also invest the dollars into this program. Will come back to the community for people to learn to do this work. So I think those are all worthwhile programs. There is my contact info. If you have questions about them, you want to talk, links for the programs I talked about, and also the full report and some of the other research that I cited. So I think I've probably taken up at least enough time. It was lovely to meet you. I'm going to pass it to the next presenter, which I think is Glenn.
Okay, following Julia, well, it's just hard for you. Following you was worse for me. So I had the privilege of working for with Jonna, I'm supposed to say, at PBEM, which is the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management. So this is a joy to be on a panel with her as well. So my name is Glenn Devitt, again, Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, which I hope you've never heard of, because if you have, it's probably been a bad day. Our role in general is threefold. So there's three stages of the response, emergency preparedness stool, if you will. So there's readiness, which is what we're doing today, getting prepared for emergencies. There's response, which is when it actually happens. And then there's the recovery phase where you put things back together into what the new normal is. So we're always engaged in all three of those stages. Obviously, today, what we're focusing on is the preparedness. So my routine job when I'm not a duty officer, which means things are actually going wrong, like Kmart fires and watersheds on fires and all that kind of good stuff. Water main breaks, yes. Yeah, we can keep going. My day job is working with our 2,000 volunteers. So we have a program called Neighborhood Emergency Teams. I'll get to a slide in a minute. And they are volunteer first responders trained by the city of Portland. They go through at least 28 hours of training initially, and they are there when professionals are not. So the genesis of this program, and I'll get to how it relates to you in a second, I promise. The genesis comes from earthquake responses, mostly Mexico City, California earthquakes, where professionals realize that neighbors help neighbors, right? When disasters strike, there will not be enough firefighters to come to your homes. I hate to tell you that. But you will rely on your neighbors. And the same thing is true for everyone who lives in affordable housing. Often they're actually better at it because they do it more often than most of us who are privileged to live in a single home. They have better resilient networks already socially, which is interesting. So the idea behind this program is that people will help their neighbors and they were getting injured doing it and dying doing it. We still see this today in other countries where people rush into disasters and they themselves become victims. So the point of the program is to train people to not become the victim, to remain a responder. So that's the goal of it. So we've been doing this in Portland for 30 years in this program, 30 years next summer. Last year we deployed our volunteers, I think 42 times. And how many of those were for earthquakes? 0. They are doing a lot of other things. In large part, they are realizing, and we are realizing, they have become climate responders because a lot of what they do are things like emergency warming and cooling shelters, major storms, flooding, sandbagging, the kind of responses that simply we do not have the investment in publicly in government and in first responders. We don't need to talk about budget cuts. We're all familiar with the headlines. We'll never fund professional emergency response the way we need to. So we need to educate people so that when they naturally, instinctively do it themselves, they're not getting injured. So drawing out of one of the things Jonna mentioned is that there are extraordinarily important technological and material and investments that you can make. And it's really important, and I don't want to detract from that. But the other thing that we often forget is that the investment on our people to do this work. Your residents, whether you're a property manager or whatever your role is in the industry, draw on that human resource because it's there. It will respond. They will respond in emergencies. So if you invest in them ahead of time, it's better for you. I'll explain that in that they do have those networks, like I mentioned. So as an example, one of the heat waves, I remember we were dropping off water at one of the affordable housing units. The property manager was not there. I think they were ill or they were dealing with their own family because it was an emergency. They were not at work. So the residents just took control. And there was one person there who I dubbed the mayor of the building because they were in charge. They knew everyone. They took the water in. They figured out how they were going to pass it out, who was on what floor, who was stuck in their apartment and couldn't come out and down to get help. So they know these things. It's built in. You don't need to build that system. The social network is there. It requires some investment to support it, however. So our neighborhood emergency teams, talk about the program a little bit. If we could, thank you. Oop, I went too far. Most of the next slide's not here. Oh, there it is, sorry. Thank you. So I mentioned, I'll just outline the program in a little more detail so you understand it. And this is open to anyone who lives, works, or plays in Portland. It is a national model, so this does exist everywhere. It's called CERT in other places, Charlie, Echo, Romeo, Tango, CERT, sorry. In Portland, it's called NET because the police SWAT team is called CERT, S-E-R-T. So if we call our volunteers CERT and the police have a CERT, and you call for one and you get the other, you have a bit of a problem. So we decided 30 years ago they have to be called NETs. So if you're from another location or if you are currently living or working in another part of Oregon, CERT would be the program in your vicinity. So it's a free 28-hour training. It's trained in cooperation with Portland Bureau of Emergency Management and Fire and Rescue. So we have professionals ranging from EMTs to firefighters to battalion chiefs who love this program, and we work very well together. And they invest to teach people the skills they need. It's everything from light search and rescue to medical response to radio use, disaster psychology, anti-terrorism response. So it's a very comprehensive overview. And then from there, they can focus on the things they like. Outreach is a huge part of this. So preparing fellow neighbors is a significant role here. We provide the materials for them to do that, to do presentations and get people prepared, storing water, preparing for summer and winter. We have cyclical programs that go through. So I mentioned 95% of people are rescued by their neighbors. Currently, we are organized by neighborhood. So we have 2,000 people. Still, it's more than the fire department has, but it's not enough for the 670-ish thousand people in Portland. So we're always training. We have another 2,000 people who have expressed interest who are in the queue for training. So that's where we go with the NET program. And we announce these publicly so anyone can sign up. It is completely free. We are not a revenue generating bureau. We don't take money in. So it is something that is absolutely free to people to sign up, and we encourage it. The training is available to anyone. Someone with a very serious criminal conviction cannot become part of the program for obvious reasons. They have access to personal information on other people and government equipment. But other than that, they're welcome to participate. So I would love for you to encourage residents in your properties to take up the call to do this. We also will do these programs. We do basic training approximately 2 or 3 or 4 times a year, depending on the money that's available. Next one will be in January. We also will partner with organizations. So again, calling on Home Forward. So Shaylin and Jacob who are here, next week, we're doing a dedicated session for their employees. So it's not residents in that case, but obviously, but it's the employees to then propagate the knowledge further. A lot of this has to spread organically through neighbors. So we can't teach every person in Portland, but we can teach people to teach others. That's really the model. But running the program is a staff of 2. We do other stuff as well. So if we're all trying to claim to do it alone, it will never happen. We follow the volunteers and they know what they're doing as well. So next week we will do this with Home Forward to put their folks through a training. So if we have a significant group, we can come to you rather than the other way around. But if you don't have those kind of numbers, certainly sending people into the public trainings is a great idea. And again, anyone can sign up. The website is at the top of the screen, portland.gov/net. And all the information and the details are there and further explanation. So another benefit to this is that once someone becomes an active net, they are able to take advanced training for free. CPR on the open market, that's anywhere from $75 to $100. First aid, wilderness first aid, which is a 2.5-day course. It's a $500 course. They get it for free because we go. My favorite part of my job is I get the federal grant money, bring it back to Portland, and give it out here. That's like the most rewarding thing I do, I think. Second most, next to working with the volunteers. So we get that money to come back from Washington to invest in our people and train them. Again, it's not in training professionals, it's in training the people and making them community assets. So those trainings become very much available. So it's a way to encourage continued participation in the program as well by investing in the people on an ongoing basis, which is actually unusual in Portland. This program, CERT, nationally, ours is the 3rd oldest program in the country after Los Angeles and San Francisco. We have the largest program by far in the nation, which is kind of impressive for the city. I didn't build it myself, so I'm not taking credit. I'm saying it's just a wonderful thing. I actually came to it as a volunteer at first and fell in love with it and got the job. So that's the gist of the NET program. Another aspect of another program we have, the other program for volunteers, is called the Beacon program. So this is a lower lift. It's a 90-minute training for free, again, for anyone in Portland. Beacon, basic earthquake emergency communication nodes, thus Beacon, are radio sites scattered throughout the city. So when it's exactly for after an earthquake, I can't imagine another condition where it would be used, but it's the way that the government will distribute information to the public when nothing else works. So there are these 50 locations around the city that are defined. The website's up there. You can look up where your local ones are. And what will happen is volunteers will go there when telephones don't work and cell phones don't work and the internet doesn't work and nothing works. And they will go there and they will find, they know where the secret locations are. The locations are public and the equipment is hidden for obvious reasons. So the volunteers know where to go with the equipment. They take it to the site. It's nearby. They set up the operation and then can communicate information out from the government, what hospitals are open, where the water drops are, where the food is, all that kind of good stuff. So that's the point for Beacon. It is not, I hasten to add, the way to call out. So you don't show up here and say, I want to call my mom in New Jersey. Not going to happen. But this is how the information flows from the government out to the public, at least at first. So again, this is an hour-and-a-half training, and anyone who it's online, there's really no barrier to doing this. My colleague Ernie Jones runs the program, and we do this monthly. I forget. I'm not going to tell you the day of the next one because I don't remember, but it's on the website. So that's another way for folks to get involved. And these are not exclusive programs. People are welcome to take part in both. So I'm sure we can talk some more about statewide stuff. I don't want to dominate, and I'm happy to take questions if you have them when we go. But again, I just encourage you, invest in the people. And something I would add too, invest in the small bit of equipment they need or the small space that they need. Storing water, storing stuff in an apartment, not easy. So think about it, if you own or manage properties, how you can dedicate even a closet is really helpful. There's a whole protocol that has been built by residents of the Pearl District buildings and also downtown. They call it vertical neighborhoods. So instead of organizing by big flat single family neighborhoods that are spread out, each floor is a neighborhood and they're stacked, right? So it's a way of thinking of neighborhoods differently. So if you can support them with that little bit of space, that's great. And then they are the people looking after your building in an emergency. It's kind of a no-brainer investment and it's a really low bar. So think about that, how you can develop that, and we're happy to work with you to do so. So I will stop prattling and thank you very much for your attention.
Hi everyone, I'm Blair Rank, real estate development project manager at Hacienda CDC. Thank you for all being here. If you start to doze off, just know it's not me, it's the carbon dioxide in the room. But I'm here to talk about capital improvements with the resiliency lens and projects that we've been working on at Hacienda and how we've been setting goals and implementing strategies throughout our portfolio. So we are a Latino-led community development corporation, and our mission is to strengthen individuals and families through affordable housing, holistic services, and advocacy for systemic change. We predominantly serve immigrants and communities of color. We have a portfolio of about 11 properties and serve around 3,000 residents. This mission and our existing work is really how we can just set the goals that we set up for these projects. So we wanted to frame goals before we started these capital improvements. There we go. Thank you. We ask ourselves the question, how are our residents affected by climate change, and how can our property serve as hubs for resiliency? Ultimately, we really wanted people to be able to come home and stay home if there is a major climate event. See it in the circle, and most of you might be familiar with these maps, but where we're located, we're affected by the overheat island effect in areas in Portland. We have a lower tree canopy than other areas in Portland as well, which both contributes to and exacerbates heat events. So we had to kind of set these truths, right, for our residents that low-income communities are the ones who are going to bear the brunt of climate change in a warming planet. Retrofitting these buildings is going to help achieve affordability, comfort, and health beyond really any decarbonization goals that the state or the city might have. I mean, we want to minimize the impacts of climate events to provide healthy homes for our residents, especially youth and adults. I want to focus a little bit on the youth component because about half of our residents are children, and for us, we understand that children are the ones, people in our society who are going to be affected by climate change more than the rest of us have, right, for the rest of their lives. So we wanted to kind of do this exercise to look at like a day in the life of one of our kids who live in one of our residences. So Julia's story, she's a 5th grade resident at Via de Rosas. She begins her day riding a fossil fuel bus to Scott Elementary. I'm assuming it's a hot day, right? Even though it's late May, it's getting into the 90s because we know that warmer days are going to be happening sooner and sooner in the year. She's learning about the sun and that it can generate electricity, and she wants to become a scientist. She comes back to Hacienda's after-school program, Expresiones, and she's able to complete her homework in a climate-controlled environment. At home, Julia is lucky because she lives in one of our properties that already has a mini-split system. So when she gets home, it's nice and cool, and she doesn't have to worry about the heat. She gives her friend Bianca, who lives in Clara Vista Townhomes next door, a question about homework. She's wondering about a specific problem, and Bianca mentions that she's really struggling to focus on her homework because of the heat and how hot her apartment is, and she also struggles to sleep at night because of it. So we're just doing this one exercise. We're realizing that one, there are inequities throughout Portland for folks, right? There's also inequities just within our portfolio, right? Just down the street, one child is having a different experience than the other. And that really imparted on us the need to upgrade these buildings to ensure that our residents aren't having to deal with these effects of climate change. So establishing some goals, I'm sorry, it's kind of cut off a little bit, but we want to ensure that our residents are benefiting, but also understand how we as an owner and operator can also benefit from these. We first want to be true to our mission, and we want to dismantle economic barriers through cost savings with these improvements. And through these cost savings, we can invest and reinvest in the quality of life for our residents. Also, for us as an owner, kind of talking a little bit of a financial process, is that we can take on utilities now when we upgrade to solar and use more efficient systems. So our tenants only have to worry about rent. And we really want to do that as well because we want them to be able to use these systems. We want them to run cooling when it's hot out and not have to worry about how much they're spending in utilities, even if we reduce those energy savings, right? Ultimately, we want to maintain flexibility as well as longevity as well as the quality of systems we're installing. So then that's the big question, is how do we pay for all of it, right? We need to identify multiple different funding streams to start this process. So, Portland Clean Energy Fund, which has been a big ticket item for those of us who work in Portland, ORMA and GMAP for new and existing projects, Energy Trust of Oregon, Enterprise Green Communities, PGE has their own incentives, Inflation Reduction Act. If you had spending, don't worry, -2, because there's so much available and so many different requirements you have to meet. So, we're trying to get into the projects that we're working on. So, our largest and most extensive project is our energy efficient home or CASA initiative. It is a Portland Clean Energy Fund project, and we were awarded $9.4 million to upgrade 6 of our properties. I will see them solely. These scopes of work will be applied to different properties, ranging from mini splits, eliminating gas systems, new heat pump water heaters, as well as new bathroom fans. This will improve the quality of life for over 1,000 residents, half of which are children. And then we also realize that these upgrades aren't just energy focused, but these major climate events are going to be rain, sleet, snow, and we need to ensure that our properties are performing well in those situations as well. So we have 2 properties that we're experiencing water intrusion issues. Hazardous road waste down in Manhattan and then flows in North Portland. We were able to obtain GHAP funding that allowed us to install new roofs, new doors, windows, exterior siding, insulation. Something that is maybe not as sexy to talk about as but we did some stormwater system rehabilitation as well to ensure that the site is draining well and that the improvements we're doing in our buildings aren't being challenged by these kinds of poor drainage on the site. And we're learning a lot by this in improving our existing properties, but we also are applying these same knowledge gathering and implementation into our new properties. So West Side Outages is a recent development in the Coe neighborhood that was completed in December 2022. It's all electric. It has rooftop solar. It also achieves an Earth Advantage Platinum, which I just know that we got confirmation today on. So that's great to hear. But that was done a couple of years ago, and we're working on a new project, Dolores, in Hillsborough, and there's a lot more incentives that are now available, and also our own education is helping us achieve and identify more opportunities. So similarly, we're doing all electric, we're doing rooftop solar, but we know we want to generate more electricity. So we plan to build an accessory solar structure as a carport. There's money now for battery backup, so we're looking towards that. And then also looking at green community certification, just because it aligns better to our goals for this project. So with that, I just wanted to say that these upgrades are really very reasonable and feasible for building owners to take on. You just kind of have to have the knowledge and kind of the will to do it. So I hope that maybe you can take a little bit of inspiration back to your companies and your organizations and build a more resilient Oregon. Thank you.
All right. My name is Alex Bertzel. I'm with Earth Advantage. I'm head of residential innovations there, but I'm really speaking to you because of my background as a builder, 30-year background actually. And I want to talk a little bit about the strategies that lead us to some of those cool projects that we've seen, like the Hacienda does. So quick question, who's involved in new construction, multifamily new construction? Any role? Okay, great. How about retrofits? And who has thought about resiliency measures in those endeavors? Okay, so it'll be a little bit of a recap, but I think it's just going to be interesting to see what do we consider. And I'm going to skip over that intro, but what do we really need to consider when we talk about resilience? Because you will find out if you really pose that question, everybody has a different opinion what that means or what we are really trying to address. So here's like we talk about, we heard about some of these that we need to address: natural disasters, climate extremes, utility outages, health and safety, community well-being, long-term viability. All that is a concern, but really, when you set out to look at a project through the resilience lens, then really what are we talking about? So duration is one. So life safety and life safety evacuation during event, building codes take care of that now. But if you have existing buildings, will people be able to evacuate safely? So is that the duration we're talking about? Just trying to get people out of the building. Off grid, right? So for example, I consulted with a client that was a senior living organization, and they said well, after the earthquake, right, we just come back, right? We're going to reoccupy right away. And we're like, well, you don't know what you're asking for, right? The military is trying to figure that out, and they haven't figured that out, how to do that. But is that what we're trying to do? And then are we clear on what we're trying to, to get to? Or shelter in place is probably what we're talking about when we're talking about resilience. And is it a long-term or short-term goal, right? Are we saying okay, we have to get through a couple of days, or do we have to go through a couple of weeks? And then essentially, and then same, what are we trying to address, right? What are our goals? What are the events that we're talking about? Again, what is the duration of the operation that we're trying to maintain, during this event or after an event? And what are the services that we are providing, right? Maybe not all the services are necessary. And we're going to talk about what those look like. But just having that be like really clear, like when you set out to talk about resilience in a new construction or retrofit project, is what are we actually trying to achieve? And so really like where my background is in high performance construction, right? And energy efficiency is resilience, right? And I want to point out like how those are connected together and how we really need to look at what, like how those complement each other. And we really get benefits on both ends, which you already heard a little bit, you know, like if we reduce loads, we save on utility costs and we keep it warmer or cooler depending on what that is. But the first point is like passive survivability, right? So if you have, in most of our events, we're really talking about power outages, and that could be short or long. If it's more severe, maybe there's even no water or something like that. But we're talking now about energy. And so if how unpluggable is our building, right? If we have no power, like how long will people be able to stay in the building? In you know, typically we see these power outages during, you know, like severe weather events, like, so it's really going to be really cold or really hot. How long can they stay in the building so we don't have to move them? So the idea is, if we are have passive measures, and we're talking about what those look like, and reduce the impact of the weather on the building, we save energy and we become, you know, more durable and more resilient. So once we talked about, once we've addressed all the passive measures, now we can talk about active measures. So that's equipment, right? So now, for once, we prepared actually for the really efficient equipment, right? So heat pump, who's familiar with heat pumps, right? So not every building we can just swap out the equipment, you know, like gas boilers for heat pumps. We have to get existing buildings heat pump ready. And in new construction, we have the opportunity to plan that in. But really, we have to address those efficiency opportunities around the enclosure first, and then we can talk about the equipment. And in addition, by reducing load and the draw of the equipment on the grid, we extend the capacity of the grid in severe weather events or other events, right? So not only do we not maybe, you know, will we be able to better weather outages, but we might prolong periods before we even see an outage, right? So you might know, like, we have a certain draw on a power line, the power line, you know, heats up and sparks fires, and then, you know, we have a power outage. And so we might actually, we play better with the grid, so there will be more periods of time where the grid doesn't go down. And then finally, once we've addressed those two, now we can go to renewables. So I think it's like, it's always, someone mentioned, you know, like, I sometimes call it eco bling, right? So like PV looks great, everybody understands how it works, but it really should be the last measure, like the last piece to do to, like, okay, now we've minimized loads on the property, on the building, and so now we have an opportunity to offset the rest. Maybe even in combination with storage. And hey, now, you know, we have like what's often considered microgrid, and we can even stay online, even in a power outage. And then I don't know if people are aware that you have to have storage to do that, right? Just having solar panels, you cannot access the power in a power outage because we need to protect our, you know, linemen down the line who might be working on the grid, and you don't want to backfeed, right? So you need on-site storage to be able to access it. It doesn't need to be much anymore. Like, so now we really actually have batteries only to be able to access it. So now if we're sizing everything right, we basically draw down the battery at night, charge it back up during the day, and so we go, right? Doesn't, you know, batteries that's expensive, but it doesn't have to be much anymore. So this is probably, most of you are familiar with this. Just want to go really quick through this. Some really low-hanging, these are no-cost items, right? Potentially. It's like, how do you orient my building? What's the massing, right? More compact is more efficient. There's opportunity by orientation that I can take advantage of the weather and natural climate conditions. So I can harvest solar in winter when I want. I can reject it in summer. I can maybe use prevailing winds for natural ventilation. So this might not cost much, right? So these are the first measures when we have the opportunity on new construction really to start from the beginning to consider. And then next we talk about our building envelope. Again, these are the passive measures. We put them in place once. Yes, there's an upgrade. You know, like if we are extending, you know, if we have upgraded insulation or better performing windows, but you know, they're typically going to be there for 50 years or more. Insulation, everybody understands, right? If we have more insulation, we have less heat gain and heat loss. Air leakage is it's like one of my favorite topics because it really addresses so much more than energy efficiency, right? If our buildings don't leak, we save energy, but we also get better indoor air quality because we're now in control of what happens in the building as opposed to like drawing in air, that with smoke and particles and things like that. Thermal bridging, it's get a little bit exotic here, but like if we have building components like concrete or steel, then we have like nice insulated walls, but we have, like a slab edge or like some concrete component that still creates energy loss through the envelopes if we address those. And I call windows again separately because if you think about it, if I add a little bit of insulation to my wall, I might be improving my my insulation value by 20% or so. With windows, I might be able to improve that by 40-50%. And again, there's other benefits when we do that because now we have like noise, sound might be a huge component, right? A lot of our, particular affordable projects live in like regions where, like near to a freeway industry or so. And we have like a benefit that can, like there's a lot of stress on occupants if it's noisy all the time. So I think windows are always considered very expensive, but I think it's worth looking at this as a measure overall. So if you look at your envelope as a whole, windows might actually come out ahead as an interesting component to upgrade. Okay, so now the systems, heating and cooling, right? We need to have both, right? We need to be able to do both. So heat pumps to the rescue, they do both, right? That's perfect. Ventilation and filtration, right? So if we have a smoke event, what do? We don't bring in outside air, right? So what happens when at 2,000 ppm, anybody who, like we want to be at 400,000 is okay, 2,000, I can see people eyes glazing over, right? So that's what, so we can't just do that. We have to bring in air. So we have to ventilate, right? So we have to ventilate. And what do? We have to filter, right? So I have to balance indoor pollutants with outdoor pollutants, which is not easy, right? But that's something we have to address. Water use and hot water, right? So water use as a whole, right? We're seeing in a permanent drought. So how do we reduce water use? Which then also will be, like in an event, if we use less water, there's less water we have to provide in an event. Hot water specifically, it's something that we want to address with heat pumps that's still kind of difficult to do in multifamily. But the technology is there. It's not the technology that's the problem. It's typically like implemented because we have to think differently. Just like I was thinking about getting a building heat pump ready, we essentially have to also get the team. It's really the team that installs the system. We have to get them heat pump water heater ready because it's a little bit different with the way we have to think about it. And then finally, efficient appliances. We all know that there's an opportunity. And by the way, now we're all electric, right? So if we go to electric cooking, we're all electric. We have less indoor pollutants. And we're perpetuating, like we reduced loads, right? So we reduced energy demand, we reduced emissions, and we reduced the consumption of fossil fuels. So not only are we getting, cheaper bills and be more resilient, we also actually help that we don't, reduce emissions so that we're actually, what we're trying to now cope with doesn't become more severe. This is another one of my favorites, commissioning, right? So now we have all this nice, this nice equipment. We have PV, we have heat pump water heaters, we have ductless heat pumps or central heat pumps, whatever. It needs to be commissioned, right? So it really, someone has to look at it and say, like, is it performing or is it doing what we are intended to do? Nothing works like it's intended, like we wanted to perform out of the box, so to speak, right? So that's super important, particular because with heat pumps. They really have to be dialed in because they're sipping energy, right? So heat pump, again, like we're moving heat, we're not making heat, we're moving heat. And like if there's little heat outside in winter, we're moving little pieces, right? So if they don't work as intended, then there's frustration, right? We get complaints. And then, worst case is the public perception might change and like heat pumps don't work. And then recommissioning, right? Commissioning is so important that you have to do it again. Like do it like whatever interval. Like talk to your teams. They're like, okay, how often should we be doing this? 5 years, 10 years, right? But it has to happen. In particular, if you have turnover with facilities personnel that might not understand, like, how do I service this equipment, right? They need to then really keep an eye on this stuff. It's not, it's like you have to tend to it. Okay, then finally, sheltering option. That's really essentially what we're talking about, or where we started, right? So how do we shelter people in place? There's some design considerations here. If I can't afford to upgrade my entire building, well, can I create safe zones, right? Is there like areas, we heard about the term cooling hubs or like cooling areas, right? Is that something that we can create? We have to make sure like, okay, how do we ventilate? Again, if you can't afford to ventilate the entire building, ideally that's what we do. But if we can't do it, is it in certain zones? Entrance control is just like, okay, if the power's out for several days, how do we make sure we keep our people safe? Supplies and equipment, like create spaces where you have equipment that you need in an event, right? So now we're going beyond specifically in the building and design. Besides that, like where are those spaces, right? Where is the stuff and how do I get to it in an event, right? If you just put it in some back corner because that's where you happen to have room in your design phase, you might not be able to access it, right? If there's a certain event. And then communication systems, right? It's obvious. How do we stay in touch? And there's a lot, I guess, where Glenn is going to help you both on how to equip your emergency supplies and how to stay in touch. And then specific strategies, power outages, we talked about, like ideally you have backup power. So solar with battery combination. Emergency lighting is, again, it seems like a no-brainer, but in an existing building, like check, like, like because people can really get hurt. Again, if you have an event where people are in a rush, they don't pay attention. So we have to have emergency lighting. Severe weather, climate adaptive measures. So cooling system, right? We need to cool. Again, if you don't cool the entire building, is there certain areas you can cool? And wildfires, it's a really important topic to us. So for one, it's like, how do I protect the building? Right. So what materials am I using? We have a big discussion now at the urban wildland interface, right? So what are we doing with these buildings that are, like on the outside of the urban boundaries, like they're very, they can be vulnerable to wildfire. So what are the materials that we're using? And again, like indoor air quality. How do we address indoor air quality? There is no, silver bullet. It's a lot of measures, right? There's, individual, like what can individuals do? Jonna was talking about like how, occupants came up with their own, strategies. So we need to, maybe you can crowdsource that. Like, so like if you have all your occupants, bring them together, which you should be doing anyways, right? Then they should know each other, they rescue each other, they can help each other. So that's probably the number one resilience measure you can do. And then earthquakes, seismic upgrades. And what people don't remember is like we have to strap our stuff down in these units, right? So if you have shelves, anything that can fall over, then make sure it gets attached. I got a couple slides with pictures. I don't know how we're doing on time. I could, let's see real quick. Okay, here, there's some shading strategies, right? Really simple, what we can do, like permanent shading. So if it's designed properly, we can harvest sun in the winter, right? Low sun in the winter, but keep it out in the summer. You see how the effect on the bottom right there, it really works really well. You just want to go through it. Exterior insulation is kind of the measure that we do to upgrade envelopes, both for thermal bridging and additional value. Insulation values. This is kind of, this is a great example. This is New York. It's a townhome, a brownstone, but spot the difference, right? This is infrared. I think like people are familiar, right? High, like light areas, these red areas is heat loss, right? The darker the area, the more we are conserving energy. This is a retrofit, right? This is what can happen. On the bottom right, so getting the building airtight, there's a few measures that have to be considered. It's not magic. It's just more a sequencing and training issue. We're already utilizing materials to get there. We just have to install them properly. You want to do the next one? And then, we get to systems. And look at this, right? So this on the upper right is the PAE building. It's a living building. So it's a really, this is actually where our office is. But look at this, like the little pieces of equipment that we have, right? So now, we have room for PV, right? There's like almost no rooftop equipment. So there's a win-win by reducing loads. And then on the bottom right, because we have challenges with heat pump water heaters and the technology and how it's really applied to the project, we're seeing now packaged units, right? So no more head scratching, no more trying to figure out how this technology works. Just add water, right? Hook this up to water, power, and then they work. A little bit of an action shot in the, this is the building where you see like ducting when we talk about ventilation, like, or cooling, like, well, how do we get to each unit, right? That's typically, you know, we have cadet heaters, but what do we do about cooling and ventilation? Well, this is what this could look like, right? So this project actually provides cool, like tempered ventilation air to each of the units. And then commissioning, super important, right? Blower door test, right? We're commissioning the envelope. We're making sure it's actually airtight, and then make sure this equipment really works. Okay, I think that's it. All right, thank you.
I'm going to roll this through fast for the rest of you because I actually have a slide deck from the GRRP's HUD weekly meeting. It's 35 slides for later, so it's just going to be a reference document. But there are 3 cohorts that you can pursue. So those cohorts are $40,000, $60,000, and $80,000. $750,000, $10 million, and $20 million. There are sections throughout the 12-month period. We've already gone through those first couple cohorts. So I have a couple of those slides in this deck, but I just want to let you know that I'm going to be going through fast on those, and then we can get to some of the other questions and answers and stuff a little bit later on. So one thing on here, and apparently the slides is missing, interestingly enough, thermal comfort, which is kind of hilarious with what we're seeing and feeling right now. But we have homes that are places for shelter and also for comfort. And then we have, obviously, spend about 90% of our time indoors. So air quality matters. And we can't see those particulates. So what's going on? We're sharing air right now. Obviously, the ventilation system isn't super great here. So we're sharing with our neighbor. But there are some strategies for filtering out. And some of these are the strategies for eliminating, removing, filtering, and improving these bugs at different levels. And one of the things also that we wanted to bring as a demonstration we can look at later on for those is during our first events. I don't know if we had several 2021. Some people had filtration, and you probably still felt the thick air. We had some of the worst air in the world at that time. This is a device that you can make for a fairly cheap price. It's just basically a box fan, 4 MERV 13 filters, and some tape. And then I have, we've got an upgrade that's happened over the building science world because there's spaces on the corners of these box fans, which actually pulls the bad air back in and then pushes it back into your room. So we call that a shroud. So you can look at what that looks like just to make it a little more efficient. In addition, there's some other things, right? We're getting close to the winter season. So we're going to be checking our CO monitors and our fire monitors to make certain that those function in those spaces because we're going to be spending more time indoors using heating elements. Some of those are still fossil fuels, and we have to make certain that we're safe for our environment, the habitants. And then one other thing on the funding source, so I'm going to flip through some of these things quickly. This is the presentation. They do these on a weekly basis from 3 to 4 Eastern time. You can go on as a NOFO, so you can't really talk to those folks directly. You have to talk to them during these presentations. This presentation is available both here as part of the presentation that we're giving, as well as online. And it's very clear about a lot of the questions on those that I've been attending have been about what products actually apply. It is Davis-Bacon applications for everything. Just be mindful of that. And I'm going to zip through these things, pause for a second on 1 or 2 slides, and then move forward. So the dates, the difference between grants and loans is really kind of the restriction on affordability and then some of the types of other things you might be doing for your existing kind of financing structure. And Earth Advantage can help through some of this stuff as well for that application. And here's some of the dates specifically for those specific cohorts. I'll pause here for a second. Okay, and I know you've been waiting patiently for this, which is that raffle for resilience. Okay, so I use this actually as a training method for my field staff about having a proper PPE. This helmet happens to have lost a part of it, but it's cleaned out. I promise for the team here. You all should have a ticket. Do you have a ticket with you? Yes. Okay. I'm actually gonna, Jonah, would you give the honor or all right. And the first thing that we're doing is we want to make certain that you are prepared for the future. And part of it is the discussion we had today. It's going to be the conversations that we're going to continue to have as a community, but also having knowledge and available for even the people that you love, the people that you serve, and your fellow community. So we have an emergency preparedness logbook, 2 of these. And then the other thing that we have is a hand cranked, modernized kind of, you can get to know, listen to emergency channels. It also has a hookup for your cell phone. It has a light, and it has a radio type thing that you can kind of access through a hand crank. There's also a battery backup that you can put in there for other purposes. So we're going to start with the first 2 are going to be these logbooks, and then we can move on to the last piece. A30. Well, then it's woohoo. All right, one more logbook. Eight 840. All right. And the last raffle. It's going to be A27. All right. Thank you very much. We are open for questions now. Questions. All right. You don't need a microphone? Okay. Yeah, so I'll take the first part of this and then I'll pass to Alex here. So there's an expression from the 1970s, which we learned when we had the issues with the market where we were having an energy crisis, and we ended up sealing up all the buildings and we created a sick building syndrome. And so we have that same kind of scenario here when we're thinking about energy efficiency, right? And before I joined Earth Advantage, I was a trade ally of Energy Trust of Oregon, working on single family and senior housing projects affordable in the market. And we were told, not by Energy Trust of Oregon or those folks, I'm not calling any shame on those elements, but we were told that, I don't know if you know about the Missoula floods, but they deposited radon in the market.
And they said that the radon just was north of the Columbia River. It didn't actually land here in the south of the Columbia River. And we're kind of wondering, like, well, radon doesn't really decide that it's going to go to the north. It does distribute all over. So for the organization, the contractor that I was working for, we started just doing radon tests in the homes, and we were finding spiked levels for the work, and we were doing weatherization on those homes. And so part of the message that we talk about is that you can air seal tight, but you ventilate right. So you have to think about those in combo. You can't do one over the other. You have to think about those as a combination. And if you don't, you can create other building issues. So we have to think about this as a holistic solution, not a singular solution. Nothing to add, okay. Other questions? And I think we want to use the mics a little bit, just not because people can't project, because I was a drum major back in my high school days, so I can project very well, but for the audience members that are remote as well, so they can hear these questions. Any other questions? We've either captivated you or put you asleep with the carbon dioxide levels. They are way off the charts here, so we've been mustering through levels that are definitely impacting our mental capacities. All right, how are we doing on time? We are right at the button. Okay, thank you very much for your time and attention. Really appreciate it.